It was the night of June 24th, 1982. A massive British Airways Boeing 747 was cruising through the skies above Indonesia, and then, without warning, it was thrown into the most terrifying crisis imaginable. One by one, all 4 engines flamed out. An eerie blue glow danced across the cockpit windscreen, while thick smoke crept through the cabin. The flight crew had absolutely no idea what was happening to their aircraft. From 37,000 feet, the giant jet began plunging downward at a frightening rate. Could Captain Eric Moody and his crew save the lives of 263 people on board, or would this flight vanish forever into the Indian Ocean? This is the extraordinary story of British Airways Flight 9. The flight begins on the evening of June 24th, 1982. British Airways Flight 9 was being prepared for its next leg at Kuala Lumpur International Airport in Malaysia. The route had originated in London Heathrow and was making scheduled stops through Bombay, Kuala Lumpur, Perth, and Melbourne before its final destination of Auckland, New Zealand. From Kuala Lumpur, the aircraft needed to cover the roughly 5-hour stretch to Perth, Australia, a sector that appeared completely routine. A total of 247 passengers and 15 crew members were aboard, and everyone expected nothing more than a comfortable overnight flight. The aircraft assigned to this service was a Boeing 747-236B, a powerful, wide-body jet, purpose-built for long-haul operations. Its registered name was the City of Edinburgh. In command of this flight was 41-year-old Captain Eric Henry Moody, a seasoned aviator with thousands of flight hours already behind him. Seated beside him was 32-year-old Senior First Officer Roger Greaves, and completing the cockpit crew was 40-year-old Senior Flight Engineer Barry Townley Freeman. All 3 had joined the aircraft at Kuala Lumpur and were responsible for flying this leg through to Perth. Weather reports showed clear conditions ahead. The radar screen revealed no threats whatsoever. Everything pointed toward an uneventful journey. At approximately 8:30 p.m. local time, Flight 9 lifted off from Kuala Lumpur and headed toward Australia. The aircraft climbed smoothly to its cruising altitude of 37,000 feet. All 4 engines were performing normally, and the flight was progressing exactly as planned. Most passengers had already settled in for the night. Some were asleep, others were reading. A few were gazing out into the dark sky beyond the cabin windows. The flight attendants were quietly going about their duties. Up in the cockpit, Captain Moody had just finished his meal and stepped away briefly to use the lavatory. Everything was perfectly calm, but no one on that aircraft had any idea that within just a few minutes, this peaceful journey would turn into something from a nightmare. At that moment, the plane was passing southeast of Java Island, above the Indian Ocean. What the crew didn't know was that approximately 110 miles away, Mount Galunggung, an active volcano, had recently erupted, sending a massive, invisible cloud of volcanic ash billowing high into the atmosphere. At 8:42 p.m., First Officer Roger Greaves and Flight Engineer Barry Townley Freeman noticed something deeply unsettling. Strange blue light had started playing across the cockpit windscreen. It looked similar to St. Elmo's fire, an atmospheric electrical phenomenon sometimes encountered in storm clouds. But the weather radar showed completely clear skies. Even so, the 2 crew members acted cautiously, switching on the engine anti-icing systems and illuminating the passenger seatbelt signs. Around the same time, smoke began appearing inside the passenger cabin. Since smoking was still permitted on aircraft in those days, the crew initially assumed it might be cigarette smoke drifting through the ventilation system, but the smoke kept building, and soon a sharp, acrid smell filled the air. Some passengers seated by the windows looked outside and were horrified by what they saw. The engines were glowing with a strange blue luminescence. Then, at that same moment, engine number 4 surged violently and shut down. The flight engineer immediately called it out. "Engine failure, number 4! The crew snapped into action, running through the emergency shutdown checklist, cutting fuel supply to the engine and arming the fire suppression system. But this was only the beginning. Just 1 minute later, at 8:43 p.m., engine number 2 surged and died. Within seconds, engines 1 and 3 followed. All 4 engines had gone silent. This was an unprecedented event in aviation history. When Captain Moody returned to the cockpit, what he found defied belief. Blue fire was flickering intensely across the windscreen. First Officer Greaves described it as looking like tracer rounds streaking toward the cockpit. Smoke continued pouring into the cabin, and then came the call that stopped everyone cold. Engine failure number 4. Engine failure number 2. 3's gone. They have all gone. Warning lights flooded the instrument panels. Amber caution lights, master warnings, alarm tones. The cockpit had erupted into chaos. The pilots were stunned. They had no explanation for what was happening. Captain Moody immediately instructed First Officer Greaves to transmit a Mayday call. Jakarta, Jakarta, Mayday. Mayday, Speedbird 9. We have lost all 4 engines. But even transmitting the distress call was a struggle. Static electricity surrounding the aircraft was interfering with radio communications. Jakarta Air Traffic Control initially couldn't grasp the severity of the situation. They assumed perhaps just one engine had failed. It was only after a Garuda Indonesia flight relayed the message that controllers began to fully understand the catastrophe unfolding above them. The Boeing 747 had now become the world's largest glider. With a glide ratio of 15:1, it could theoretically travel 15 kilometers forward for every kilometer of altitude it lost. From 37,000 feet, that gave the crew roughly 23 minutes of flight time in approximately 91 nautical miles of range. But before any plan could be executed, another crisis struck. At 26,000 feet, the cabin pressure warning activated and oxygen masks dropped from the overhead panels. Panic began spreading among the passengers. It was now impossible to pretend that nothing serious was wrong. The crew began descending at 1,800 meters per minute to reach an altitude where the outside air pressure would be breathable. In the cabin, the atmosphere was desperate. Some passengers were praying quietly. Others were scribbling final messages to their loved ones on scraps of paper. Families held each other tightly. In the face of all this, Captain Moody made a passenger announcement that has since become one of the most famous and remarkably composed in all of aviation history. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We have a small problem. All 4 engines have stopped. We are doing our damnedest to get them going again. I trust you are not in too much distress. Meanwhile, the cockpit crew was working through every system they could think of. Fuel, normal, electrical systems, functioning. But the engines simply refused to restart. No manual or training exercise had ever addressed a scenario like this. The crew attempted restart after restart, and each time, nothing.
Stand by to retry number 4. Isolating the pack now.
The aircraft had now descended to 13,500 feet. Below them, the mountains of Java Island reached heights of at least 11,500 feet. If the plane dropped much further, a collision with the terrain would be unavoidable. The crew made a firm decision. If the engines hadn't restarted by 12,000 feet, they would turn toward the open ocean and attempt to ditch the aircraft on the surface of the Indian Ocean, something a Boeing 747 had never done, and which no one aboard wanted to find out about. Restart attempts continued, even though the aircraft was now far below the recommended maximum altitude for in-flight engine restarts. Attempt after attempt failed. The plane had been gliding for 15 minutes. Many passengers had mentally prepared for the worst. Throughout all of this, the cabin crew performed remarkably. They maintained calm in the cabin, moved frightened passengers seated alone so they could be near others, and managed to prevent full-scale panic despite the situation. While the aircraft was at 13,500 feet, engine number 4 thundered back to life. What had actually happened was this. Volcanic ash from Mount Galunggung had been ingested into the engines, where it melted at the extreme temperatures inside the combustion chambers and coated internal surfaces. As the engines cooled down during the glide, and as the aircraft descended below the ash cloud, that solidified residue cracked and broke away, restoring airflow and allowing ignition to take place once more. Captain Moody immediately used the restored thrust to slow the rate of descent. Within seconds, engine number 3 also fired up. The aircraft slowly began to climb again. Then engines 1 and 2 restarted as well. All 4 engines were running. The cockpit crew exhaled for what felt like the first time in 20 minutes. The crew requested a climb to clear the mountains of Indonesia, but as the aircraft approached 14,000 feet, the St. Elmo's fire phenomenon reappeared on the windscreen. Captain Moody wisely reduced the throttle, but engine number 2 began surging again and had to be shut down. Now the aircraft was running on 3 engines, but it was stable. T was flying, and it was heading for Jakarta. As Flight 9 approached Halim Perdanakusuma Airport in Jakarta, the crew encountered yet another serious problem. The windscreen had been almost completely destroyed. Volcanic ash had sandblasted the glass. It was as though someone had taken a grinder to every panel. Captain Moody could barely see through it. Air traffic control reported good visibility on the ground, but from inside the cockpit, everything was an opaque blur. The crew decided to execute an ILS approach, Instrument Landing System, but the vertical guidance component was also malfunctioning. First Officer Greaves devised a brilliant workaround on the spot. He used the distance measuring equipment to build a manual glide path in his head, calling out the required altitude at each DME fix. He effectively constructed a virtual glide slope from nothing. Through one narrow strip of the windscreen, the runway lights were just barely visible, but the landing lights on the aircraft were also damaged from the ash, reducing visibility even further. Relying entirely on instruments and the trust they had built in each other, the crew guided the battered aircraft toward the runway. Every second mattered. A single error could end everything. But Captain Moody, First Officer Greaves, and Flight Engineer Townley Freeman held it together perfectly. At 9:46 p.m., British Airways Flight 9 touched down safely at Halim Perdanakusuma Airport in Jakarta. The plane rolled to a stop on the runway. The moment the aircraft came to rest, the cabin erupted. Passengers embraced each other, tears streaming down faces, some laughing, some praying, some simply sitting in stunned silence. All 247 passengers and all 15 crew members were completely unharmed. Not a single person had received so much as a scratch. It was nothing short of miraculous. When investigators examined the aircraft over the following 2 days, the full picture became clear. Mount Galunggung had erupted, and Flight 9 had flown directly through its massive invisible ash cloud.